Many of us know tipping as one thing, slipping a few extra bucks to your server, barista, or cab driver for a service provided and a job well done. In essence, it was like saying, "Hey, here you go, buddy, you did a great job." And of course, it was a huge deal back in the day to receive such commendations that came with cash. I mean, who wouldn't want to do a better job after being appreciated in cash gifts? Well, like I said, that used to be a long time ago, and recently, it's become so ingrained in our dining experience like the salt and pepper shakers.
The options are 60%, 90%, and 200%.
Tipping is almost compulsory wherever you go, from the supermarkets to the coffee shops, bars, restaurants, and even drive-thrus. And the worst part, it doesn't really matter if it's a bad service or not. Welcome to Foodipedia, the place to feast on food knowledge served hot and super fresh for everyone. In today's video, we'll unravel the truth about America's tipping culture and how it's transformed over time from gratitude money to main salary. So, grab a snack and sit tight as we take you through the fascinating journey of tipping.
Society says, don't tip these guys over here, but tip these guys over here. That's bullshit.
From its humble beginnings to its current role and not-so-secret ingredient in many service industry workers' salaries, and what it could possibly be in the future. So, without further ado, let's dig in. Did you know the word tip was not actually a real word, but an acronym that stands for "to ensure promptness"? It was first used in 1610 as a slang word for share or give. It gets even more interesting as we journey back in time to learn about how it came to be and where this tipping tradition all started. The culture of tipping has its roots in the medieval era, but historical records often trace it back to Europe in the 1600s. This period marked a time when visiting a coffee shop was considered a noteworthy event, and tipping became a common custom in response to the services provided during such occasions. In those days, it was pretty simple. If you found yourself particularly pleased with the quality of service you received, you might slip in an extra coin or two just to say, "I see what you're doing, here's a coin for your trouble." Fast forward to the 17th century, and overnight guests in fancy homes started slipping their host's servants a little something extra for a job well done. They called it a vail. Soon, London coffee houses joined the tipping party. Customers who sipped their brews and discussed the latest gossip decided to show their appreciation to servers with a bit of extra cash. And just like that, tipping became as common as a morning cup of joe. Then, during the 1850s and 1860s, people moved from Europe to America, and the practice followed suit, although the story is a bit different. You see, when the Americans learned that tipping was a thing, the well-to-do folks with wallets thicker than a history textbook were tip-happy and would give out 10 to 15% tips to just about anyone who served their coffee or food with a smile. You can say they tossed those extra bills with glee, like confetti at a celebration. But hold on, because not everyone was clinking glasses and cheering for this tipping regime. Nope. There were those who weren't exactly doing cartwheels over the idea of parting with their hard-earned cash as a way of showing appreciation. For them, tipping was simply explained in 7 words, an idea that just didn't make sense. They argued that tipping was un-American and a slap in the face to the very ideals the nation was built on. Some states like Iowa, South Carolina, and Tennessee even took matters into their own hands and tried to outlaw the whole tipping frenzy entirely. But by 1926, those laws were tossed aside, and tipping continued like a seasoned film with unending episodes. Before then, in 1965, there was a population of newly freed slaves stretching their legs in a world of newfound freedom. And, of course, they had to make money to survive. So, restaurant owners had this peculiar idea that were granting them a special privilege, the luxury of earning tips, like a white person. But here's the catch, they weren't even getting the full wage. Fast forward a bit, and in 1938, the first federal minimum wage law made its debut, marking a significant milestone. However, it took a whopping 3 decades for the tip minimum wage to have its moment in the spotlight. In 1991, they settled on a federal minimum wage of $2.31 per hour for tipped employees, while that of non-tipped employees starts from around $7.25 per hour. Shockingly, that figure still stands as of March 2023, but slightly differs in various states across the country. What's even more shocking is that the United States stands alone as the only country that exempts employers from paying their tipped workers the full minimum wage. And did you know that in over 40 states in the US, it's perfectly legal for tipped employees to receive less than the standard wage? Why, you ask? Because they're supposedly making up the difference with tips. It's like saying, don't worry about the small paycheck, you'll make it up in high fives and fist bumps. That's so sad, and maybe explains why the tipping culture in the USA is currently going out of control. Presently, after almost every service, you'd expect the screen turn, that moment where the barista swivels the payment screen your way, prompting you for that extra touch of generosity. The tipping culture in the USA is spreading like wildfire, that it's not just your favorite coffee spot anymore. We're talking fast food joints and grocery stores, and even your friendly neighborhood plumber might nudge you for a tip. And believe it or not, those self-checkout machines have jumped on the bandwagon too. It's like all service industries caught the tipping bug, and soon you might find yourself wondering if your blender wants a tip for making that killer smoothie. But all jokes aside, this shift in the tipping landscape is transforming how we express gratitude for services. According to a survey in 2022, consumers said that they tipped more than 21% on average. Nowadays, some people are arguing that a 20% tip might be cutting it a bit short. Now, let's talk about full-service restaurants, shall we? While the percentage of tips hasn't seen a massive shift in recent years, the actual number of tips at these places saw a significant bump of 17% in the fourth quarter of 2022, compared to the same period in 2021. And don't overlook the quick service joints, they're not missing out on the tipping action either. Tip frequency there shot up by 16% during the same time frame. So, what's with the hike in tipping percentages? We have people talking out their rage and shock on social media about the whole tipping saga. One lady in particular shared a video on TikTok and was downright shocked after being asked to tip for her Subway sandwich. Another lady was totally dismayed after she was asked to tip at a self-checkout station at an airport. This begs the question, when did we go from tipping as a show of appreciation to compulsory tipping? Well, there's a reason for that. In fact, 3 reasons to explain the facts. Number 1, the pandemic. When the service industry took a hit during the COVID-19 pandemic, consumers stepped up in a big way. They started tipping for things that, in normal times, might not have even crossed their minds. The percentage of transactions with tips went from about 46% pre-pandemic to a solid 56% in January 2022, which is a significant bump, isn't it? Now, here's the backstory. Businesses were in a tight spot due to the coronavirus pandemic. Their usual customers were not coming through, and traditional transactions were looking a little sparse. So they put on their thinking cap and found one clever solution, asking for a little extra in the form of tips. And guess what? Since then, that ask hasn't gone anywhere. Number 2, big tech. In almost every service station you visit these days, there are kiosks and tablets with 3 large tipping suggestions that pop up on the screen in front of you, with 3 options chosen by the business. Now, here's where it gets interesting. According to a 2022 creditcards.com survey, about 22% of folks feel the pressure to tip a tad more when they're presented with various suggested tip amounts. And the most shocking parts, those tips are not usually in their 5, 10s or 15s for a quick takeout, but most of them start at 15% as a bare minimum, some even at 20 or 25%, and even all the way up to 30%, which I find really wild if you ask me. They use those options as an indication of what the normative range is and feel compelled to tip within that range. So, the more you ask, the more you get. And, speaking of tech, the big players in this picture are the companies Square, Toast, and Clover. They launched onto the market about 10 years ago with the goal of helping businesses have smoother operations. But don't be fooled, these companies behind the electronic tipping screens make a lot of money by taking a cut from every transaction, including your tips. And number 3, inflation. Although customers are complaining about the hike in tipping percentages, businesses aren't putting up a fight about it. Why? The third main driver of tipflation is the job market. So, here's the picture. Coffee shops and service spots are in a full-on showdown for workers. They're offering enticing perks like better benefits and fatter paychecks to entice top-notch talent and performance. But here's where it gets messy, as businesses are treading a fine line. On one hand, they want to keep their prices as pocket-friendly as possible because, let's face it, we're all on the lookout for a deal. On the other hand, they recognize that their workers deserve a fair paycheck. So, collecting tips serves as quite an unusual way of increasing wages while maintaining the same menu price. Now, while service industries in the US are in their tip-happy times, it might interest you to know that there are not one, not two, but over 18 countries where tipping $1 or $2 into your server's hands can raise major eyebrows. In fact, if you're not too lucky, you might be charged with a crime. Yes, it's that serious. Countries like Australia, Spain, Denmark, Estonia, France, Italy, Japan, China, Malaysia, and the list goes on, are not into tipping. In fact, experts say most Asian countries, especially China and Japan, have some of the strictest tipping laws. It's highly frowned upon and considered rude or embarrassing to tip anyone in any of these countries. That means you can't tip your barista, server, cabbie, or even that kind storekeeper, although it's believed that before the blooming technology, tour guides in China relied on tips for their income. Well, not anymore. So, be careful, because your generosity might land you in serious trouble if you find yourself tipping in that part of the world. But have you also thought about what could be the future of tipping in America and perhaps the rest of the world? Well, let's time travel into the future and peek into the crystal ball to see what the future holds for tipping in our beloved USA. Honestly, the future of tipping is quite uncertain, but with automation increasing rapidly in industries, how we see service jobs is shifting. We've already seen restaurants experimenting with tablet-based ordering systems, and self-checkout kiosks are popping up in fast food joints. And, of course, this could potentially change the way we tip. For instance, do you tip a robot barista that serves you a perfectly crafted latte? What about food delivery drones? Does the pilot get a tip? Or do you just give a friendly wave to your flying meal courier? I don't think so either. So, while the technology may be changing for the face of service jobs, slipping some extra bills for good service provided is unlikely to disappear, but it will probably just manifest itself in different ways. Perhaps in the future, we'll be sending digital kudos or virtual high fives to our service providers instead of tips. Now, over to you, foodies. What do you think about the American tipping culture and its future? Will it end someday, or will it just get worse from here? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Foodipedia for more interesting and foodylicious content like this. See you in the next video.